Thomas was a newborn puppy. He was beautiful. His long golden hair made him special. He was the son of Lola and Bruno. He was easy to spot, as he was always wearing a red lace that his father had given him on his day of birth. Thomas, being only a couple of months old, was curious and overly adventurous. He was always imagining great adventures and feats, especially when it was raining. Thomas loved the rain. For him, there was nothing like a rainy day. He loved jumping in the puddles and splashing everywhere. It was something special for him.
His unquiet mind had already gotten him into trouble before, as he often got lost playing along the wonderful stories that he would make up. One time he got as far as the lake. He had never seen so much water before. It shined and glittered. It was the biggest puddle he had ever seen. He was anxious to jump in and start splashing water everywhere. It was not long before Lola noticed that Thomas was gone. Worried, she cried and yelled across the neighborhood in hopes of finding him. Fortunately, Dilma, the beaver who lived in the lake, quickly spotted Thomas and immediately took him to Lola.
Luckily, Thomas didn't get to the deep end, where he could have found himself in big trouble. Lola, who was overly worried, said,
You need to be more careful, Thomas. You're just a little puppy.
I am not, Mother. I'm a big dog now and I can go out on my own.
He replied.
The lake has a deep and dangerous side. You could have drowned.
She replied, worried.
One day it was raining hard, harder than Thomas had ever seen before. The bright lightning strikes were like camera flashes, and its loud rumbles made the whole house shake. The rain was so intense that Thomas could hardly see across the street. He was home alone as Bruna and Lola had gone shopping and wouldn't be back until nighttime. He could only imagine of all the great adventures that he would be missing out on for being inside. So he quickly built up courage and went outside. The streets were dark and gloomy. All that was heard was the sound of the falling rain. All animals were safely sheltered, awaiting the storm to go by. Thomas, who was frightened, was also determined to reach the lake again. He wanted to see what that deep side that his mother warned him so much about was. It was not long before Thomas reached the lake, which was shook due to the storm. The water level was much higher than usual. The lake now seemed to be the sea. Waves were tall like buildings. The wind howled furiously, and yet Thomas anxiously wanted to jump into the lake. And so he did. Ignoring all of the warnings that his mother had given him, he jumped right into the deep end. Quickly, Thomas noticed that there was no place to stand on and that his swimming skills were not as developed as he might have thought. He began to sink quickly, and his panic only made him sink faster. Frightened and unable to call for help, his bright red collar was slowly fading towards the bottom of the lake. To Thomas's luck, Dilma, whose house was on the deep side, saw when Thomas jumped into the lake. She immediately called for help and frantically started swimming towards Thomas. The lake was shaking as the storm was relentless. The waves, due to the howling wind, made it harder for Dilma to reach Thomas. After struggling for a few minutes against the tide, she finally grabbed Thomas by his bright red collar and dragged him to shore.
Once on shore, she slapped Thomas with her long flat tail and pushed out all the water that was in his stomach. He gushed water out of his mouth like a faucet. After a few coughs, he was fine, scared, but unharmed. Lola, who was alerted by Dilma's distress, was right at the shore side. She thought of punishing Thomas because of his reckless acts, but she figured that he had learned his lesson. Once Thomas saw Lola, he said, "You were right, Mom. I will always listen to you from now on." Lola and Thomas headed back home to warm up by the